afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A brief presentation on creating a literate environment by Ms. Shalini Joshi. I request Ms. Shalini to present her presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Jha. The course unit that we worked on writing for adults is divided into two parts. And it includes not just skills related to how one should write for neo-literate and semi-literate adults, but it also includes a lot of information on conceptual issues and exercises on conceptual issues. Because we feel that writing itself is a skill which needs to be developed, but in addition to that, the perspective with which we write is also equally important. So while writing for neo-literate and semi-literate adults, we have talked about issues of gender and issues of language as well. So why are we talking about writing for adults? Because all of us have been doing that. Looking at some statistics here, there are about 781 million adults who lack minimum literacy rates, and governments must focus on building literate environments. There's a lot of talk about creation of literate environment, and this is a term which has been introduced by UNESCO and was also included in the Global Monitoring Report last year. So when we talk about literate environments, it's very important to have reading material which will sustain that literate environment. Also, the National Readership Survey, which is a survey which is conducted every year in India, shows that there are so many million people, almost 359 million people, who read and understand at least one language, but do not read any publication. And affordability is not the only constraint. So obviously there are other reasons, which may be to do with access, which may be to do with content, etc. In the 11th five-year plan document also, there is mention of the need for reading materials for neo-literates. The document says that there is a dearth of reading materials, and there are 120 million neo-literate readers who do not access any reading material. And in order to provide reading material to them, we need people with specialized skills who can create this reading material. And therefore, we have tried to address these issues in the course unit. So, what are the needs of adult learners? Before we start talking about what are the practical skills required or what are the conceptual issues, it's important to talk about the needs. Firstly, there is limited availability of reading material. We know that a lot of neo-literate and semi-literate adults live in rural areas and urban slums where reading material is difficult to access. Secondly, the content of reading material also does not always include topics that interest these readers, because they are adult readers. And the language of a lot of newspapers and magazines that are available is formal and difficult. And we know that people with fragile levels of literacy find it very difficult to read this material. And finally, gender is represented in simplistic or stereotypical manner in a lot of published manner. So therefore, there is a need to make available material that is interesting, that is informative, and also written simply and informed by a gender perspective. There are libraries in rural areas and also in urban slums, but there are very few libraries that cater to the needs of newly literate and semi-literate readers. And there are a lot of books that are available for children but not for adult learners. Also, libraries are spaces which are accessible to men. Very few women in rural areas visit libraries, and there are few efforts made to encourage a culture of reading among adults. So there is also a need to develop a reading culture. In this situation, what is the requirement? We have seen there is an absence of reading material. So for people like us, for adult educators, it is extremely important to provide informative and interesting reading material to this category of readers. When we worked on the course, we felt that it was important for adult educators to firstly understand the needs of newly literate adults, also to develop an understanding of the principles of writing for adult readers. So whether it is understanding gender, whether it's understanding issues of language or other issues which we feel are important in any reading material, it is important for those writing this material to develop an understanding, a perspective on these issues. Then, of course, practical skills, how to write simply, how to communicate your thoughts, ideas, information in a creative, interesting manner. One more thing which we feel is important when writing for adults is to understand the importance of decentralized material. Material which is created in a participatory manner, which includes learners in the creation of material. Material which is not created by adult learners like us, but by members of the community, people who are semi-literate, neo-literate themselves. So that is also an important part of material creation. And finally, understanding the need for a literate environment and also the present situation. How do we construct the newly literate adult? And I work with Nirantar, which is a resource group that works on gender and education. And we have worked with many organizations in grassroots areas. And as a trainer, I have conducted this activity with several adult educators, facilitators, etc. And it's a very simple activity and is very effective. So I'd just like to take you through the activity. The first part of the activity asks the adult educator, what according to you is the kind of material that neo-literate and semi-literate adults like to read? Make a list of all such material. So in most cases when we have conducted this activity, people have said that neo-literate readers, neo-literate adults like to read information on health, on population control, on vaccination, on cleanliness, on social issues, etc. The second part of the activity asks the adult educator, what is the kind of material that you like to read? So a lot of adult educators have said that they like to read news reports, they like to read stories, fiction, they like to read about places of interest, and they like to read about social issues. So the question that comes up is that why is there a difference between the two lists? Obviously there is a difference maybe because of the literacy levels where the adult educator is more literate, but one is also questioning the fact that is it only literacy or is it also the kind of material that is available? Why do we think that neo-literate readers or readers in rural areas are not interested in fiction, are not interested in reading about places of interest or about sports or news reports from other parts of the country or even international news. And this is an activity which I think everybody should try at their own workplaces also. Then looking at issues of gender. Why is it important to address gender while writing for adult learners? And in a lot of material, gender has been represented and included in a very sensitive manner. Yet, we feel that while gender is a concern that is to do with both men and women, yet sometimes it becomes only a synonym for women. So if you have more women in your material, does not necessarily mean that the material is gender sensitive. Also, gender should not be just an add-on. So like in a magazine or in a broadsheet for neo-literate readers, it's not enough to have just one gender article or a gender story. The gender perspective should inform the entire content of the material. Thirdly, gender does not work in isolation. It is linked to issues of caste, it is linked to issues of religion, class, etc. So it's also important for us to look at that. And finally, role reversals, which we have seen in a lot of material, need to be avoided. So it's not enough to have, stories where boys are performing the domestic work and girls are going to school. These are very simplistic role reversals, which we should avoid in the material that we produce. Then language. One of the very important working principles has always been that language should be simple, but the content should not be simplistic, because we are talking to adult readers. Adult readers are people with a lot of experience and with a lot of knowledge. So complex issues need to be kept alive in what we are writing, yet the language needs to be simple, not the issue itself. Another issue to do with language is writing in the local language, because we feel that it allows people to express themselves. There's also the whole politics of mainstream Hindi. We know that in a lot of Hindi-speaking states, people don't always speak Hindi. It is possible and it is desirable to write in the local language, and we feel that there is nothing like pure language. Language which is understood by the majority is language that should be used. Then the issue of participatory material production, where we feel that the involvement of the community in determining content, language and style of publications is something that is also desirable. This means that people who are readers of the material, people who are neo-literate and semi-literates themselves, are involved in every aspect of creation of that material. So whether it's gathering information for that material, whether it's writing, editing, designing, or even distributing it, they are part of every aspect of the material creation. We also feel that this makes people active citizens, because they are not just recipients of information, but they are also gathering information and providing it to others. And female learners, women who are neo-literates, we know that a lot of women gained literacy skills through the total literacy campaigns and other literacy programs. So women learners can be actively involved in this process. There is an example of this kind of material production activity, where a newspaper called Khabar Lahariya, which is a fortnightly newspaper, is being produced by women in Chitrakoot district of UP. This was started in 2002, and now the newspaper has also expanded to another district, and the women who are involved in producing the newspaper are women not only from neo-literate backgrounds themselves, but they are also Dalits, they are tribal women, they are women who belong to minority communities, and it's a very well-established newspaper in that area. We need to create spaces for ourselves. So this is a space that we have created, where the community is involved in material creation, and a lot of issues that we are talking about have been addressed through the newspaper. So even the whole idea of how do you combine theory with practice, I think Khabar Lahariya is an example of that. So I'd just like to end my presentation here, and then maybe take questions or discuss it.
Various formats that can be used while developing reading material, that means drama, songs, etc., and how they are effective in communicating the messages.
You have written that the issues of language, issues of gender and issues of communication, that should be taken care of while preparing the reading material. But the most important thing is some basic knowledge about theories of curriculum formation should be there, and the values, beliefs and practices of the society in which the neo-literate is living, that should be included.
May I know from Madam Shalini that what factors you took into consideration while writing, either it is a story or drama or whatever you are writing, what factors could you have in your mind?
Lisa Krolak, UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. I very much like how you broadened the concept from writing for adults to the whole concept of creating a literate environment. And I would say we can even broaden this concept more by adding information such as how can we collect information from the community to share more, and how to have more active, let's say, storytelling or writing sessions for children, writing competition with adults and children, to have an even bigger literate environment.
When you are writing for neoliterates or semi-literates, illustrations in the book, specifically colorful illustration, play a very big role. Suppose you are talking about Nilgai. People may think its color is blue, but the moment you give the color illustration of a Nilgai, people will know how it looks. For example, zebra, how it looks. Then language, even when you are talking in a specific language, for example, Hindi, for a particular term, a particular thing, the term varies from region to region. So, those will have to be shown. Gender issues, now for quite some time, it has taken the form of an issue, and instead of writing he or she, I write S/HE, he or she, that explains, and it is also used in internet. So gender issues is only some areas of writing. It does not traverse all the areas of writing.
How can we take participation of the learner when we produce information based material?
You have mentioned about participatory material production, and you have suggested that community needs to be involved, but it is very difficult to involve them so far the materials are concerned. So unless we know the more.
We are writing the books for neoliterates. First there is a word length. What should be the letter in one word? This should be mentioned. What is the illustration ratio? 40% or 60%. What would be the length of a paragraph? What is the 500 or 600 or 700? This should be included.
Hello. The material should be such in such a language so that easy understandable by the learner, by the neoliterates. There are some abstract thing, there are some concrete thing, and also that to be clear and step by step in the material, and if it is self-learning material, program instructional method may be used.
Thank you. I'll try and respond to the questions. Some of these issues have been addressed, but a lot of things about what font to use, what point size, etc. are there in the chapter. Then there were a lot of questions about how do we involve the community in material creation. I think for us, while working with neoliterate and semi-literate learners, what is important is to always remember that their need for information is not very different from ours, which I also try to explain in that activity. So the choice of topics, of whatever content we choose is more or less similar to what we, people who are maybe slightly more literate or much more literate, like to read. But the process itself is not simple. We have worked with Khabar Lahariya for now almost 6 years, and with them it's been a very long process of training that group, of doing trainings on writing, on news gathering, on editing, on formatting, designing, everything. So it has been a very long and intensive process which has taken us very long, and the group also very long. But But it is now a very independent group, and this group of women, they are now going and training other groups in different states. So this also says that it is possible. So while the process itself is tedious and long, it is definitely possible. We've also involved other resource persons, people who've been involved in material creation, people who are journalists themselves, or people who worked with various NGOs to train this group of women. Involve people in a limited manner, but definitely it is possible to involve people in writing and in creating their own material. So not just writing songs or not just writing proverbs or creating posters. They can very much tell you what is happening in their areas, in their villages, get that information and write it, edit it and produce it as a newspaper, as a broadsheet. Then I think about needs assessment. Yes, it is very important to do a needs assessment, but I would also like to share that while doing any kind of assessment of what are the needs of neo-literate learners, it is important to remember that sometimes learners will not be able to tell you what their needs are. Because while doing a survey with neo-literate learners where we asked them that what would you like to read, most of the people said that we would like to read literature on religious stories or mythology or cleanliness. You know, this is basically material that is already available to them. No woman will tell you that, neo-literate woman will tell you that I'd like to read a Premchand story. And it's because she's never read a Premchand story or any other literature. So obviously she will not be in a position to say what exactly her needs are. So while it is important to do a needs assessment, while it is important to understand the community, their levels of literacy, etc., I think as adult educators, as people who have worked with the community, we also have an understanding of what needs can be. I don't agree with the suggestion that gender is not part of agriculture or certain other areas. I think gender is part of everything that we do. It's just the way in which we look at things. I think if we are talking about agriculture, I can talk about 1,000 things to do with gender, right from who's called a kisan, who's called a farmer, to who does what in farming. So there are many things in agriculture or physics or any other science where one can look at issues of gender discrimination or gender roles and gender stereotypes. So I don't agree with that suggestion at all. Some suggestions about creating a literate environment, I think they are very good suggestions. Some of these I think we should definitely try out here, because while it is possible to create material, the challenge is to make material available to readers and to sustain their interest in reading and then to sustain their literacy level itself. So it's not just enough to produce material. Dissemination of material and how learners are using that material is extremely important also.
Thank you, Shalini, for presenting in a nice way.